There we go. Hi, everyone. My name is Melissa Pitati. I'm with the Core Humanitarian Standard Alliance, CHS Alliance, working on an initiative to cultivate caring and compassionate aid organizations. I'm so happy to be here today because a couple years ago when we started the initiative, I had a burnout, and I heard a lot of people were going through burnout. And I thought about, is there a way we can get leaders in our sector to take this issue seriously? And what I kept hearing from people when I asked about this is, give me data, give me evidence, tell me what's the return on investment if I think about well-being, which I thought is a bit odd being in the humanitarian and development sector. But over a course of time, it became clear that there's a real appetite in our sector to have a better awareness of how aid workers are feeling, and to have a way to know that over time, and to learn and improve and maybe compare across organizations, since many of us, maybe we work for one organization today and we move on to another organization tomorrow. There's a lot of interconnectivity between us in the sector. And so I'm so pleased to be here today to hand over to our co-facilitators and our wonderful speakers to really look at measuring well-being as a strategic organizational imperative. Before I introduce you to the facilitators, I just wanted a few housekeeping. Please note that we're recording this session. So if you choose to come on camera or audio later on, it is recording, and we will be publishing this video on YouTube. You can watch all the sessions without joining on audio visual. And we'll bring you on as appropriate, but mostly we're going to be monitoring your chat. So the chat function is going to be really important. We encourage you to introduce yourself on the chat there. Now, I'd like to introduce you to the co-facilitators who I both met through our mutual friend, Rachel Velasco-Jacquot. First, Scotty. Scotty had a career as an auditor before she joined MSF. And for those of you who don't know, MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, has produced a lot of people looking at the well-being issue. And the late Alessandra Pigny has written a book called The Idealist Survival Kit, which I would recommend to many of you to read. She worked in the emergency team and then in a number of headquarters offices. She held several senior finance roles, including internal auditor, risk management. Today, she is a registered nutritionist, drawing on her experience to help aid workers prevent and recover from burnout. Her interest in this session is to explore how to broaden the scope of staff well-being through a strategic risk management approach at the organizational and sectoral level. Our other facilitator, Dan, I first met at the International Women's Day. The ILO was having a feminist magician, and she asked someone to come on stage, and Dan came on stage and he was cut in half. So that was my first encounter with Dan. He is a social entrepreneur, a professor, and a humanitarian worker. He is a social innovator and a facilitator. He's worked in the private and nonprofit sector. He's been a founder in several startup initiatives, and he's particularly interested in how can we bring together social innovation, how can we bring design thinking, how can we have evidence-based approaches to systemic challenges. I heard about systems thinking from Dan first, such as staff well-being in the humanitarian sector. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Scotty and Dan. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Melissa. Thanks for such a lovely introduction, and a pleasure to be here. So first, to begin with, I really want to just frame the discussion we're going to have for the audience and for the panelists. So why are we having this dialogue? I think Melissa's touched on it quite well. I just want to make a couple points that I think we should emphasize. I think the first point is that we really want to raise awareness and emphasize that the importance of tracking and measuring well-being is critical to be more effective in responding to the challenges that we face in the humanitarian sector from a strategic, operational, and risk management perspective. So we really want to emphasize that. Number two, what do we mean by staff well-being? We really want to clarify that we're talking about staff well-being and not staff wellness. Because when we speak about well-being, the way we want to define it for our panel discussion today is all aspects of working life, such as the mental, physical, social, financial, career, the strategic, the organizational level. This is well-being. Well-being, a very holistic way of looking at the health of an individual and the organization. Wellness, we could define wellness more like as the individual tools such as meditation or yoga programs or exercise, nutrition. But for this purpose, we really want to emphasize we're looking at it from a well-being point of view and from an organizational level. Thirdly, we really want to build common ground between all of us here today to see how we could move forward on this initiative. And lastly, we want to investigate how we could build a collaborative framework for benchmarking and tracking. How on a sectoral level we could begin to create indicators, harmonized indicators that we can adopt all the different organizations to measure against each other, and also begin looking at how we could develop interventions that we could share and profit to respond more effectively to the challenges that the workers face on the field. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Scotty, who's going to share with you an innovative idea to stimulate your thinking and hopefully get you out of the box a little bit.
Okay, thanks, Dan. So I just want to introduce a concept which was proposed by a group of Swedish accountants and then proposed by the Harvard Business Review. So you might be wondering what a group of Swedish accountants has to do with the aid sector. But again, just to get us thinking outside the box a little bit. So they raised this question, which is, if organizations care and value human resources as much as we say we do, then why don't we treat them as an asset on our financial statements, like we do investments in, for example, equipment or building or financial assets? So in accounting terms, we account for staff as an expense, just like we do office supplies and travel costs, but without measuring the investments or value, how that evolves over time. So their question is really suggesting that staff are a long-term asset rather than a short-term expense. Yeah. So this suggestion of treating them like this would force an organization to be transparent, even externally transparent, and holding them accountable for protecting that asset, for nurturing that asset. So just to be clear, I'm not suggesting that we do this across the sector, that we change our accounting policies, but it does call into question, first of all, how do we hold ourselves as a sector truly accountable for staff well-being? And then are there other practical, innovative ways in which we could measure staff well-being, which would be transparent and which would allow us to track it over time, and then which would ultimately help us to protect that staff well-being? So to help us explore these questions, I would like to ask the panelists to please introduce themselves and just to give a little bit of insight about how they could imagine their organizations being involved in this kind of question. So let's start, please, with Eunice.
Thank you, Scotty. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Eunice Mutiri. I'm currently working with World Vision as a senior manager, legal, governance, and risk. And I have over 15 years of experience in the humanitarian sector, right from the grassroots level to the place of providing strategic oversight over our programming in different organizations. And I'm interested in the conversation today as a risk manager because I recognize that staff are our most important asset, not easily replaceable, and they're very essential for us as we go out to deliver aid to the people in need. Recognize that This asset is also the one that will help us determine how the culture of the organization will be and whether we'll be effective in our delivery of service. So it's important that we intentionally manage the risks that would come from the well-being of our staff and treat it as a strategic priority. I also see our organization participating in this process from a joint learning research perspective, contributing to the benchmarking process, and also holding each other accountable in how we are delivering aid to the people in need. Thank you.
Thank you, Eunice. Melly, would you like to go next?
Thank you, Scotty. So good morning, everyone. My name is Nelly Prera. I am a French national with origins from Senegal and Guinea-Bissau. I'm a senior HR professional with a focus on organizational well-being. So I work for the past 15 years in the humanitarian and development sector, working for international organizations, but also the United Nations. And I'm currently the HR director at the Jesuit Refugee Service, which is a faith-based organization accompanying, serving, and advocating on behalf of refugees and internally displaced people. So I'm happy to join this conversation because I'd like to tell you more about our employee well-being program that we have initiated in 2016-2017, and also the importance of partnering with universities and also external organizations in order to build an employee well-being program which is based on evidence, on data, and also making sure that when we do this type of work, and when we speak about our employees on the ground, we speak about internationals, but also locals. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Melly. Okay, and over to you, Roger.
Thank you very much indeed, Scotty. Hello, everybody. Nice to be with you. My name is Roger Parry. I'm Director of Agenda Consulting. We are a research consultancy. We specialize in global staff engagement surveys and have worked with many humanitarian organizations, both INGOs and also UN agencies. In the last couple of years, particularly spurred by COVID, we've found a lot more interest in well-being, people wanting to track and understand well-being in their organizations. We ran a couple of surveys last year, one a broad sort of COVID impact survey, of which well-being was a significant part, and secondly, a multi-agency survey with a number of UN agencies, specifically focusing on well-being. Both were really interesting. We got some great data sets and took a multi-agency approach. And so I'm delighted to be here today contributing to this panel. I think if we can get the initiative going, then what we could contribute is running a pro bono sector-wide wellbeing survey. And if that gets off the ground, very much look forward to working with others. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. So with that, then we are ready to jump into our panel discussion. And just going into our first question, I just would like to frame it by saying that when I was an internal auditor, the general director used to ask our team, what are the risks, what are the organizational risks which should keep me awake at night? And thinking about that question, staff well-being has to be included in that we are service providers, and that service relies fundamentally on our staff. So with this notion of risk in mind, I would like to ask the panel the first question, which is, what do you see as the long-term risks and impact to the organization of not when we don't have staff well-being? So, and I'll just, I'll put the question into the chat box, and I will ask the audience to, as you have questions and comments, please type those into the chat, and we'll include a question from you at the end of the discussion. So, Eunice, would you like to start based on your role in governance and risk?
Yes, an interesting question. What is keeping us up at night? And I want to frame this starting from an observation that was made by the strategy and management guru, Peter Drucker, at the beginning of the 21st century. He wrote that In the 20th century, the most important resources we really had, any company, was about the production tools. But as you enter into the 21st century, the most important resources that you'd actually have is the knowledge within the organization, the skills, your workers, and their productivity. And the kind of workers we currently have at the moment is a generation of people who want to feel valued. They want to have a sense of control on the work that they're doing. And they are intentionally seeking out environments and workplaces where they feel that their needs will be met and in their strengths, they'll be allowed to thrive. Therefore, the risk of not managing issues relating to staff well-being is very high to the organization. It has a ripple effect across the organization's operations. And we know that risks usually don't stand alone. And the risks of staff well-being are also the same. They are like the hydra. If you don't take care of one risk, it's soon growing into so many other branches of risk. They are interrelated and interdependent. And you know what? For instance, if you look at an issue of a toxic work environment, you are likely to start seeing staff transitioning in droves. The challenge and the sad fact is that it's not the ones who are toxic who leave. It's the good ones who start leaving. And when the good ones leave, they leave with the organizational knowledge that you've built over a long period of time. And recovering that might not be so easy, because at times you can say, that one will go and we'll quickly recruit another one. The cost of recruitment is very high. Training a new staff, getting them to fully on board and be productive at the level of the staff who've transitioned, if they were a good one, it's usually a steep curve. And we know that when those staff go, they are likely to go with some institutional intellectual knowledge, business insights, and secrets that the new staff will be coming, they will not be having. We know that they were the people who are influencing the culture of the organization. They were literally your brand ambassadors. They were speaking about who you are as an organization to the audience out there. So when these staff leave, they will not be leaving alone. They will live with a message to the world. They will live with a story that this is the kind of a workplace that you have, a place where their well-being is not taken care of, and yet we know it's an issue that you need to consider from an organizational safety and health perspective. It's an issue regulators are looking to see. Are we respecting the rights of our staff? Are we providing them with an environment where they can thrive? And in that environment, as people go with the message that you might not be the best of the employers, your brand is getting diluted. And we know your reputation as a not-for-profit organization, people in the aid sector, it's the only currency you have to trade with. And that reputation, you build it over a very long period of time. But it can only take like 5 minutes or one story out there for it to be destroyed. I don't know, the cost of recovery is very high, and in some instances, you might never recover. So it's important that we prioritize staff well-being and knowing the consequences of not prioritizing it. And therefore, it's a call to act differently and treat staff differently. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Eunice. You bring up a lot of excellent points. Melly, can I hand over to you next?
Yes, thank you, Scotty, and thank you, Anis. It's true, she brought up a lot of excellent points, and I'd like to add a couple more of points into what Anis shared with us. So from an organizational standpoint, it's clear that if you do not have an employee well-being program in your organization, on the long term, you are losing competitiveness on the market, okay? So you lose funding, you lose also the trust that you acquire among your stakeholders, among your donors. You are not able to fulfill your legal and moral obligation to care about your employees. So an organization which will not have an employee well-being program, or who do not have an employee well-being program, is not able on the long term to efficiently fulfill its mission. And this is a real problem in the organization. And more the organization is bigger, it doesn't really, how can I say this? They don't really see it until the lack of support to their employee well-being becomes public, becomes systematic across all departments and across all, let's say, organs of the organization. And when it becomes public, it's already too late to make any type of reverse, let's say, solution. So what I would say, it's that for organization, when the long-term impact of not having an employee well-being program, it's really damaging in terms of economic stability, but also in terms of reputation for the organization. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Melly. Okay, and finally over to you, Roger.
Thanks very much. I completely agree with Eunice and Melly. From our staff surveys, our staff engagement surveys, what we see is significant connections between well-being and other factors. So one of them is about staff engagement. So those staff who have less good well-being, their work-life balance is less good, or perhaps they are experiencing some form of abuse or discrimination, we see their engagement reduce substantially. They are much less positive about the organization as individuals. They're less well connected. And we see that in the data time and time again. I think perhaps another point, perhaps just to draw out, which is that the impact, the organizational impact, gets higher as the individual gets more senior. So if you've got a manager who is got really poor well-being, then it's not just affecting, it's affecting their whole team. And so the impact is greater. So yeah, those are some of the observations that we've seen.
Thank you for that. I just would like to add what a quote that I saw from the ILO, which said, workers' well-being is a key factor in determining an organization's long-term effectiveness. Many studies show a direct link between productivity levels and the general health and well-being of the workforce. So it's definitely a topic which is being addressed across the sector. So just on this topic, I'm just wondering if, Melissa, if you'd like to say anything about the responsibility 8.9 to explain what that is and how that's.
Love to. I was so thrilled in 2019 when I got to learn about the core humanitarian standard, which was a standard developed by the sector for the sector. It's recognized, and there's an indicator in the commitment 8. Gazelle is here. She's doing a lot on people management, and commitment 8's really digging deep on supporting staff fairly and equitably to do effective work in service of affected populations. And indicator 8.9 talks about the need for policies on well-being, security and safety, but also physical and emotional. And the beauty of the guidance, and I'll put a link to that in the chat, is that it talks about the individual person's responsibility, which is there, of course, but also the manager's responsibility and ways to do things like self-modeling, modeling self-care, and also the agency's responsibility. So for me, it was really nice to see that we already have in the standard something that organizations are being measured against. Now, of course, it's that policies exist. It's not that they're actually rolled out. So there's some space for discussion there, but that we have something in the standard. And if people have questions on that, I think Gazelle is here. And also we've got some other experts like Christine Williamson here who can go deeper. And we'll have a session after this on the standard in specifics. But that's just kind of a framing for why we're linking this conversation to the standard.
Thank you for that. And maybe I can just add to that. What was stated in the report is that policies are in place for the security and the well-being of staff. And based on 57 validated assessments, 37 validated self-assessments, 19 certifications, and 7 independent verifications showed that the average organizational score for this upholding this responsibility was measured at 2.6 out of 4. So already there's a sense of benchmarking, which can then be assessed and measured over time. So great initiative. And with that, then, we can hand over to Dan to introduce the second question for the panel.
Did anyone on the panel wanted to follow up anything on that first question or what's been said already? Did anyone?
Thanks, Dan. Allow me to just comment on something that's important when staff are also transitioning. And there are doors that are opened for fraud and for losses and misappropriation because of weakening internal controls. So the question would be, what is it that we can do so that we don't open those floodgates with people going and in essentially just weakening our internal controls, building on the policies that would have provided for that environment?
That you bring up from the first question, Eunice. I also wanted to encourage the audience to please put their questions in the Q&A. As questions come in, we can also weave them into the conversation. So please do that. So for this next question, following the recommendation of the recent published report, Leading Well, Aid Leader Perspectives on Staff Well-Being and Organizational Culture, there was the recommendation of collection of sector-wide benchmark data about how staff are doing for the sector, then to reflect on those findings together and then respond and learn and improve over time from those findings. So what I'd like to ask the panelists is, how as a sector could we even begin to measure and track the staff well-being together on a sectoral level? And I'd like Roger to start with this question.
Great, thank you, Dan. And if you haven't read the Leading Well report, do read it. It's a really great report and a fantastic basis for the discussion today. I think the question about how we measure and track our well-being has to be about starting with staff experience. That's the beginning and end of it in some ways, which is finding out how people really are experiencing and the well-being that they have as a result of it. So that's really going to take us into designing and running some form of survey where we ask staff relevant questions about themselves and about their work. What's great about this framing of this session is that well-being we're seeing in a very broad terms, and that's absolutely right. The Leading Well report highlights the fact that there are many factors at play here, and we can think of physical health, we can think of mental health, we can think of general well-being, we can think of issues around burnout, which the report talks about and references some data about higher levels of burnout. We can talk about anxiety, exhaustion, secondary trauma, a whole range of different factors. And so in some form of survey, we're going to need to have a bit of a think about what the scope and what the focus is, what the data we've got is, what our experiences are in terms of some of the ways to shape a survey. The good news is that there are lots of well-recognized questionnaire instruments, so we're not having to make these things up from scratch, which have been validated and used extensively in many industries around the world. So there's plenty there for us to start with. And I think that if we could find a way of getting some large sector-wide survey together, which therefore collects the experiences of staff in a range of different agencies, then that approach could have a number of benefits. I think firstly, creating a large data set would be fantastic to be able to get 5,000 or 10,000 responses to a survey. You could really then analyze the results, explore them by different demographic factors. Is there a difference by gender? Is there a difference by age? Is there a difference by location, by role? And begin to pull out and understand where some of the sort of hot spots are, where some of the problem areas are, so perhaps where some of the areas which things are working well. I think that could potentially create a common set of indicators at a sector-wide level, but also begin to drill down and help individual agencies see their own results in relation to the whole, and then begin to start pinpointing where they are as an agency, some of the strengths that are coming through, perhaps some of the issues that they want to explore and do more work on. So I don't think surveys are a magic bullet. They don't solve all problems, but I think in terms of a collaborative exercise where we're all trying to move the discussion forward, I think they can create a really great basis, information basis for moving the conversation forward.
Great, thanks, Roger, for that answer, really comprehensive answer. Melly, do you have something that you would like to add to that?
Yes, so thank you, Roger. So let's say measuring well-being, it's in itself a very complex area, and it should be done by professional, honestly, because again, the tools and expertise required to really understand how your employee well-being fits the needs of your employee, and how you should monitor to see that you're always aligned with the evolving needs of your staff wherever they are, and including all the cultural dynamics and differences. It is important that it's done by professional. Internally, by professional, we understand how to let's say, evaluate each areas, but also the consequences of the results that will come from those analyses when you measure different areas of well-being. So this is one of the points I wanted to add to this. There's also another area which is more about the need to collect data, not only the quantitative, but also the qualitative data. And there are also different, let's say, methods to be used in those areas. And based on the evaluation area that you would like to dig into, you need to use specific tools and, as Roger mentioned, specific surveys. Another point that I'd like to add is always related to the cultural side of it. In some places, measuring well-being through surveys will not have the same, let's say, result than measuring it through focus group, for example. So again, I think this is an area that needs to be seen, let's say, on its own. It's a big area of work that if we really would like to use the outcome of it in order to build a solid employee well-being program, needs to be really thought through at the beginning of the process in terms of skills and competencies that goes into it. Thank you.
Thanks, Melly, for framing that and bringing your expertise from your organization. Eunice, would you like to give your feedback on Roger and Melly's?
Yeah. Thank you, Dan, Roger, and Mary for the contributions. From a risk perspective, I just want to say that measuring issues of staff well-being and tracking it has something to also speak to the culture of the organization. And there was a study that was done in 2019 by the Contera Group, and they talked of that organizations that we are working for, the aid organizations, many of them, they expose individuals to very stressful conditions. And it's important that we appreciate the the conditions people are in, and that many other times you're always working from a space of a sense of urgency with very tight timelines to meet. But it's a challenge to the organizations that if you're going to also talk about caring for others, the people who are in need, then you need to create a culture, an internal culture that's talking about care, compassion, and respect. And this culture will be determined by what is the worst behavior that the leadership and all the decision-making structures within the organization are willing to tolerate regarding issues of staff well-being, because they are the ones who set the tone at the top on issues of how the culture of the organization will be. It's good when you have the policies written. It's good when you have the document saying this is like our code of conduct. But are our actions also matching the words that we are saying or the issues that we have put on paper regarding how we will conduct ourselves as organizations? And we also appreciate that these are unprecedented times. The context is one that is changing, evolving very fast, and at times there is not always clarity about what are the expectations. It's a challenge to get from that space of being in a box to move to a space of what is it that we can intentionally do and address issues of culture, because your culture is going to be the secret sauce that will determine if you'll actually deliver on the strategy. Remember, culture is an organism. And I think Scotty mentioned it can eat your strategy for breakfast. So please, it's important we take care of culture as we design those indicators that will track well-being of staff.
Thanks, Eunice, for bringing that in. So, I mean, Eunice brings up this point of having to also measure the culture against these different factors. You know, I think in the first question we touched on turnover, presenteeism, burnout. We also pointed to the different risks from brand risk, ethical risk, operational risk, knowledge management, and then we've started discussing how to potentially build indicators. But how could we potentially, if we're going to get these data sets together, right? And there's surveys out there, but on a sectoral level, if people are going to start adopting these, how as a sector, what will we need to do this together? I mean, we kind of have the ideas of what has to happen. How could we do it as a sector, Melly?
That's a good question. And to go back to what Ernest said in terms of measuring, the organizational culture, it's very difficult to measure. But something that organizations often forget, it's the HR metrics, HR figures that you have within your organization, within your system, that really help you to understand or even to evaluate the culture within your organization, whether there is a lot of issues in terms of legal claims, staff relations, sick leave, long-term sick leave, early retirement. Those are elements that really defines the level of let's say, how your organization fits in a, let's say, from a scale from 1 to 10, those figures will help you position yourself as an organization, but also as, the culture of the organization. If you look at the systems and also the structure of your organization, if you look also at how the values and the mission of your organization is interpreted into the organization. And most important than all, it's the leadership inside your organization. Are they credible? Can you trust them? Are they really engaging and also embracing the values of the organization? So all these areas help you define and measure and evaluate really not only the culture of the organization, but how the organization is supporting the well-being of employees. So this is the addition I wanted to give to this aspect.
I think that's a great point, Melly, and there's some really nice aspects of culture which are highlighted in the Leading Well report in terms of what the interviewees said really helped. Modeling self-care, having open discussions of mental health, recognizing contributions, creating a listening environment, and so forth. And in our surveys, we can measure these. You can ask staff, to what extent do your managers listen to you, or to what extent do people model the behaviours, to what extent is inappropriate behaviour challenged. So I think as we begin to explore this territory, and we're particularly interested in knowing obviously about staff well-being, but we're also crucially interested in what drives that. And all the evidence is that culture has a big impact, that the way the organisation works, the way people are treated, the nature of the discussions that people have. My sense would be that we could include some of those factors in a survey design, so that organisations we can begin to explore some of those relationships. And that, I think, would be quite powerful, because it's sort of one thing to know, well, our well-being is like this, or so forth. But the key question, of course, is what are we going to do about it, and how can we influence it, and how can we move forward? So I think we could include some questions around some of those key aspects of culture which we know or we have hypotheses for that would impact well-being. I think that could be really powerful and give us a really great data set.
That's great. I think we've got some comments coming in from the chat. Melissa,
Just give you a little bit of a summary.
yeah, let's
and then
just
turn it
go for
over.
it. Great.
First, I'm really excited to read the chat and the Q&As. Isaac and Ayushi had a little bit of a debate, but then agreed on having policies. And whether you have policies, does that take away from well-being or contribute? Christophe Hench talked about the Gross National Happiness Index of Bhutan. So there's other things going on out there that we could learn from. Although the Bhutanese refugee situation would tell you there's a difference between having an index and then having inclusion, which brings me to the next point. We have from Alex Martin from the Equity Index, this idea of linking well-being to issues of structures, inequality, anti-racism, decolonizing development. How does that come into our measurement? And I'm so happy she's here, because we want to link to what she's learning with the Equity Index and her team to bring it all together. And if we remember what Jessica Horn said yesterday in her points on decolonizing well-being, we have a comment here from Leanne Hanmore that a lot of our measurements are linked to Western psychological perspectives. How do we embrace some of the healing that comes from people in other contexts that bring other resources that might not necessarily have the same approach? So maybe we could think about that as you react. Are the agendas and surveys that we do now, is it totally steeped in a Western approach, or can we bring in some others? And then the question that came from two directions, from Alan, from LWF, and Isaac. We measure well-being, and it creates a sense of expectation that staff, hey, we hear you're suffering, we hear you're struggling, we're going to do something about it. And then if there's not a clear follow-through, it might be frustrating. Like, why did we take the time to do this? And then nothing is done. So the question from Alan is, for those agencies already measuring staff well-being in some way or form, how do we make sure the results are addressed? It's very frustrating to feel like you're not being heard.
Yeah, thank you for that. Those are great points. Would any of the panelists like to respond to any of that?
Sure. I think the point about racism, I wasn't able to be with you yesterday, and in a way I think they have such a clear link to well-being. Any form of discrimination just closes down the conversation and completely inhibits that active listening that we were talking about a moment ago, and that the Leading Well report highlighted as being such an important cultural impact. So any form of discrimination just has a negative impact on culture. It's going to have a negative impact on well-being, and leaving people feeling isolated, alone. They can't be honest about how they are, and so forth. I think, Alan, your second point about it's one thing to measure, if I've understood the question right, it's one thing to measure well-being. How are we actually going to get some change is obviously the perennial sort of question. Because I think it's really disappointing in my experience to do surveys and to ask people for their feedback and then to take no action. It's almost kind of better not to have engaged it. So maybe for any agency that needs to be involved, perhaps there's some senior management sign up or something, some real commitment to taking action as a result of it. And I think survey data can be really really powerful. And perhaps, a simple approach might be about being open about the results, publish the survey results. They may be great, they may be middling, they may be quite poor, or a likelihood, a good old mix of things that are going well and things that are going less well. But I think when leaders and managers do publish results and are open with colleagues about those results, then I think that can create the right approach and the right infrastructure to start taking action. But absolutely, surveys are great, but it's all about taking action. And hopefully, if we can get some process going, then this can be a process to encourage that action.
Great, Roger. Did someone else want to speak about this? Yeah, Melly.
Yes, just to add up a couple of things on what has been said. The cultural, kind of definition that we give to well-being, to mental health and psychosocial support at work, there might be a need to revise it based on the context of where you will be offering this type of services. I mean, in our organization, we've seen that in certain countries and areas, the engagement of staff will differ because of their understanding and their reading of well-being and mental health and psychosocial support. Even only talking about mental health when you're talking about an issue at work could be already leading to a lot of stigmatization. And this is an area that we have to work on, moving forward to make sure that we are able to offer the service that are needed to our employees globally. The service you will offer to an expat or a national will differ, and there is a lot of work that needs to be done in the gap that comes out into the different services you offer. So I think we have a lot of let's say insights that we can offer those private sector organizations or even humanitarian organizations that are offering this type of services. And the needs of our employees are constantly evolving. So looking at a global perspective, yes, but at a certain point, we need to customize those needs to be really responding to the suffering of some of our employees. So I just wanted to bring up that perspective in terms of defining what well-being means in different areas of the world. Thank you.
There was a comment from Christoph Hensch was that there would need to be a whole process around constructing such an index and benchmark. So I think this brings us back to, Melly, you made a point about the field staff, a difference between international staff and national staff. And then if we're looking at how to build what Christopher meant, a whole process, with the CHS Alliance here, I think they sit in a unique position where they could definitely help with that. How can we begin doing that?
Well, that's a great question. Again, if we are looking at the work that an organization itself, I think the question must be given to all our partners, donors, in terms of how do they understand the importance of well-being? If you apply for, let's say, if you submit a proposal for a project in a certain countries, the donor will have certain requirements. It is the organization's duty to inform, your donors or stakeholders that to do some type of work, you need also to take into consideration, the workforce behind it. So there is a lot of, let's say, pushing into doing a lot of work with small resources to, I would say, increase, benefit. Even if we're in the humanitarian sector, I think we're very much business oriented in the way we do our work. So this is an element that needs to be equal in every single donors when they allow you to operate in certain countries, to make sure that there are some standards in terms of how you manage and support your employees in different countries. I think that's what I can say for now in terms of having those type of index, because there is also another element that comes into my mind right now is international staff move from one organization to the other, okay? And some organizations would have a good employee well-being program and others won't have one or would have, few resources to support their staff. So I think at an organizational level, between organizations, we should all have the same level of support to our employees, kind of a basic, a really standardization, I would say, minimum standards in that areas because of, the rotation of aid worker in many organizations. So that's what is coming into my mind right now to answer your question, but I'm pretty sure with others talking about it, I will have more things to say. Thank you.
Melissa, I saw you nodding your head a bit. I think do you have something you wanted to share here?
I was just agreeing.
Yeah, I think we're all agreeing. It's a definite challenge to find a way on a sectoral level to create a minimum standard and then potentially create indicators or ways to data share as well. I think one of the challenges potentially is, the HR information, Melly, you spoke about earlier. This is usually proprietary. So how could we actually on a sector level get to the different organizations to share this data to be able to benchmark against each other on the the key HR indicators? And then there's the other question I think in the chat, which was, the staff want to see that something's being done, want interventions to be happening. So then, an important element is how to then potentially pilot interventions and measure the interventions and report on the interventions in a way where the staff feel like they're being heard or listened to. So some thoughts from the panelists or from the audience as well.
If I may.
Please go right ahead.
Yeah, just to respond to the fact that when we always ask, information questionnaire about our employee, it is important to give back something to them because they are, I would say, they're receiving a lot of requests from, HQ and from various partners and so on. So we need to give back something. So what we did, for example, with our employee well-being program, we knew exactly the type of needs in various countries and in various areas of the organization, but also for different level of people in the organization, what were the issues that they were facing on the ground. And we were able to analyze those resources and provide different initiatives. But we also launched global initiatives to really support every single offices worldwide, regardless of the type of needs we collected, at the beginning of our research. So, for example, we have put in place an employee resilience program using the services of the Contera Group. We made it accessible to nationals and local. And this was a direct response, which was a powerful response to our staff, let's say globally. So, and in addition to this, obviously, we're doing other initiatives to continue offering support to our staff. So there is a need to respond, to give customized response, but also overarching response that really shows the support and the willingness of the organization to support the employees. And again, it's a long process. So it's a work in process every, all time, basically. Thank you.
Yeah, Eunice, please go ahead.
I would like to also add to the issue of if employees you do a survey and they feel that action is not being taken, I would say it actually works depending on the organizational structures that you've put in place for accountability, so that it's not just one level that is responsible for everything that is not answerable to another. I would say, like in our organization, this is a strategic conversation that goes all the way to the board. And it's also something that across the whole partnership, we hold ourselves accountable to in terms of what we are implementing from a staff engagement perspective. So the survey, once it's done, it's discussed with staff transparently in the open. Staff give feedback. What is it they feel would actually respond to their needs? And after that, an action plan that is monitored by the management and the board for implementation. And the challenge is that staff well-being, as we mentioned, is a cost, and it needs to be reflected in the budgets of the organization. If you're going to be serious about this, then we need to resource it fully, provide the resources for that, and be willing also as aid workers, aid organizations, to have a conversation openly on some of these minimum requirements. I would want to use an example of areas that really can affect staff well-being. It's the compliance burden that we place on aid workers. Some of the asks that we ask staff are asks that are related, like donor A comes with asks that are similar to donor B, that are similar to donor C, and it's the same staff, within the same organization, who are responding to all those many asks in a more duplicated way. And at the end of it all, you might not be able to see what's the value addition or where is the leverage, but they will do it because they need the resources. How can we have that conversation of prioritizing what is important and what we need to ask from our organizations and our partners, so that we can also start having small incremental steps that we can measure across the board that would be speaking to well-being beyond the issues of maybe like remuneration that people might not be willing to open up about.
Thank you for that, Eunice. Shall we, Melissa, is there anything you would like to bring in from the audience?
Yes, please. There's so much we can't reflect today, but we'll definitely want to follow up in the future. Alan Kalma from LWF was bringing up this whole idea of how do you build trust between organizations that they would be willing to share and benchmark. And Roger, in our podcast interview on embodying change, we talked about the need for the exercise to be framed as a learning exercise. We're benchmarking so that we can learn from each other. Maybe you're doing well in this area. How did you do it? I'm doing well in this area. How did I do it? And it's not going to be a naming or blaming exercise, but at the same time, we want to have some accountability. So perhaps building on Alan Kalma's point about needing to have trust building there to make people feel comfortable participating in a sector-wide benchmark process. Maybe Roger would want to react to that question from Alan. Or not. We can't hear you.
Melissa, sorry, that mute unmute button, isn't it? I think so. The relationship between culture and well-being, trust is such a powerful word and such an important word, isn't it? In terms of how we talk to each other and how we listen to each other. And I think at an agency level, I think that if we were to run something, then we absolutely want to avoid anything which is anywhere near naming and shaming, or those sorts of things. I think if agencies want to participate in such an exercise, they need some comfort or some assurance that this is a learning process. And I think that CHS Alliance would be a fantastic place to facilitate and enable that, bringing people together to share experiences, to share good practices, build on the excellent Leading Well report, and to deepen the analysis, deepen the understanding, and bring people together and share good practice. There's almost certainly a lot of fantastic practice out there. The challenge, I think, so often is how do we identify it, and how do we communicate it, and how do we make it accessible, so another agency who's wanting to strengthen a particular area can access that and learn from that. So I would see CHS Alliance being a very well placed to create a really great learning environment to support those activities, but also maintain a little bit of confidentiality, so there's no sort of sense in which anybody is blamed or shamed or named or anything like that. But we create a learning environment where everybody's motivated to grow and develop and learn from each other.
Point. Thank you for that. It's really encouraging to see the comments in the chat box. So thank you everyone for your participation. This is what makes the session alive. So please do continue contributing in this way. We appreciate your comments and questions. Just looking at it from a practical point of view, because the thing is, it is difficult to do benchmarking on your own. That we only know what we know. We don't see our blind spots, and that's something that across the sector can give us a lot of power and a great point of reference, rather than an organizational silo. So, with that in mind, the next question to the panel would be: so, how can we develop a framework for now that we've identified these risks? What are the practical steps that we can take across the sector to start addressing some of these questions? And again, I'll really encourage people to give your ideas of what's happening in your organization, and how you feel that it could be done practically across the sector. So with this, maybe Melly, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you. And I just would like to say, with what Melissa was saying in terms of making sure that organization cooperates with themselves.
You're on mute, Melly.
Sorry? Oops. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, good. So I was just saying, just to come back to what we were just saying, the importance of having organizations collaborating together, because we couldn't really hear what Rogers was saying. But, there are some obstacles which are linked to, let's say, data protection, confidentiality, and also the fact that some organizations are competing between themselves. So those are kind of, challenges that we face when we look at, sharing knowledge and lessons learned and so on. But I'd like to say that CHS could be a good, let's say, a good way of using those organizations who have already made a commitment to those standards to work together officially, to find that, a place where we could already have those organizations who have made a commitment. But that's just an idea. To go back to what Scotty said, in terms of understanding what we could do in organization, sector-wide. What we have done in our organization, I would say, for the employee well-being program that we have, and which was also very instrumental for our well-being program, was to open up to private sector and also to partnerships with other organizations, because we often say that building an employee well-being program, it's costly, okay? And I always said not necessarily, because there is an understanding of what staff care means beyond mental health and psychosocial support, okay? Because there are many other things if you look at policies, guidelines, and so on. But having said that, we have been able to not only partners with different types of organizations to help us really bring value to our employee well-being program, but also within our own organization, establish, board of advisors, working groups, with people from the inside of the organization, from the field, from institution, university, to really help us understand, the challenges and also what needs to be there from a technical standpoint when you speak about employee well-being, the psychological part of it, which is an expertise that you don't often find in NGOs, but maybe in bigger organizations and not easy to access. So there are tools that could be done within an organization and also repeated in other organizations. So this is what I could say from my own organization, what we have been able to put in place. So I would be, curious to hear more about other type of organizations, ideas, innovations around how to move forward this agenda more effectively across the board. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Melanie. Eunice, would you like to go next to propose some concrete examples of how you think the sector could work together to address these risks, and maybe also bringing into it some ideas from World Vision?
Yes, thank you, Scotty. Thank you, Melly. I'm really persuaded that it's possible to actually develop a risk mitigation matrix for all the organizations that we can borrow from as a learning point and allow everybody to contextualize to meet their needs. We really can't have like a cookie cutter kind of a risk mitigation matrix. The reality is that from a risk perspective, risks are best managed in the context in which they are actually happening. And it's important that we empower the organizations at that local level to best manage the issues of staff well-being. And that empowerment would come from the kind of tools and resources that you're providing and that are responsive to the needs of the staff who are the real beneficiaries of this program. So we have a lot of knowledge that we've already gathered from this research and similar other researches. And the question is, who is willing to pilot some of these initiatives and offer themselves up a kind of like a guinea pig? Let's learn from you. And I'm willing to be vulnerable and come and learn from us. And somebody has to front themselves for that so that you can draw the learnings and see the practicality of it. One thing I would say is that from my organization's perspective, we've tried to put in a process of handling grievances in a very open and transparent way, and a way that appreciates that these issues are not things that you might be willing to come openly and speak about, because there's a lot of stigma that we need to overcome and the possibility of being discriminated against just because you raised an issue regarding mental health and maybe even issues to do with your well-being. Other aspects of well-being would be like, is the environment safe enough for you? And those are not things people come out to the front to speak about. So are we providing that environment where these conversations can take place and where I can say I feel harassed without fearing that there'll be repercussions, there'll be retaliation? Do we have those environments? And that might not be a major budget driver, so to speak. I'm also seeing when that grievance is reported, how do we handle it? Do we victimize the victim, the survivor, or do we dignify them? Where people have been wounded simply because they reported, it sends a strong message across the board that you don't raise those issues here. And therefore, no one will speak about it. And the challenge is these things thrive when we are willing to sweep them under the floor. So can we maybe provide that environment where let's talk about it, let's discuss it. When you're going through issues of challenges of well-being, it's something that is normal. When we say it's normal and act that it is normal and support these people to be able to produce, be productive in a normal way, I think will make a difference. And finally, in terms of innovation and the environment that we have, the question is, goes back to trust. Are we providing that environment where there is trust to innovate some of those initiatives and allow me to fail forward without coming back to me? So are we willing as organizations to fail and learn and continuously just keep learning, knowing that we won't take second base if we are still keeping our foot on the first? Thank you.
Thank you for those practical examples and also philosophical considerations, cultural considerations. Roger, how would you like to see this move forward practically?
Great, thank you, Scotty. I'm minded by that phrase, if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. And therefore, I think in terms of managing measure, measuring out about staff experience, measuring culture. How do you manage the risks? I think you want to pay particular attention to parts of, if there are parts of your organization where culture or staff experience or well-being is not what you're seeking to be. You usually find in surveys that there's a wide range of results within an organization. Organizations are not homogenous, they're usually fairly quite a bit of variation within them. So if you're thinking of managing risk and you're thinking how do we where do we focus, I think measuring some areas is absolutely crucial to be able to focus down on particular problem areas. I think more widely it's then about tracking and repeating and being on a journey where you can focus on things, perhaps set targets and seek to make improvements. But in terms of making improvements, I think this is where taking a multi-agency approach is so exciting potentially. I think CHS Alliance are for this, for running events, clubs, conferences to share good practice so that as organizations want to move forward, they've got case studies of organizations in the same sector who've made change, and that can be so inspiring as a learning exercise. Thank you.
A little interruption. Some of you have commented in the chat that Roger's audio is a bit difficult to hear, and so our hop-in contacting him just to see if they can troubleshoot for the rest of the session.
Thank you for that. It seems like we've had a lot of comments from the audience. Melissa, is there anything that you would like to bring in from that?
Oh. I would actually like to invite, if she's willing, Giselle Balteva, because several people in the chat have mentioned as a potential space to talk about process what already exists, which is a community of practice in the CHS Alliance People Management thematic. So Giselle, if you're willing, I didn't plan this with you, but if you would click the yellow share audio and video, if you could react to that question, can we use that as a space to continue this conversation further? The question, though, is how do we bring people who aren't necessarily human resource professionals into that? Because we're really trying to build in communication. Ah, yes, we've got Gazelle. Great. We've got people here from insurance companies. We've got people here looking at equity, looking at anti-racism, looking at safeguarding, looking at risk management. So what do you think for the potential of using that space if it's necessarily bringing people from outside the HR profession?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I think maybe just to make it very clear at the outset, the community of practice is exclusive offer to members only. And you know, we can have sometimes some guest speakers who are not members, but the forum is really for members. And the idea of having this community of practice is really talking about latest trends in people management, but also hopefully discuss, open up, and talk about the challenges that we are facing in our work, and maybe try tackling them together, exchanging tools, exchanging successes, lessons learned. So it's really a space. It's quite young. I mean, we started last year, but I think we are doing much more. We are getting to know each other, so it takes time, as many things that you have mentioned around well-being. So it takes time also to build trust on even those virtual communities. So we're doing that. We're getting there. But maybe other forum, if I may, abuse of of this time is the Humanitarian Human Resources Conference. That is a yearly international and very diverse, because we have went online since last year. So it's a conference that really provides that space for not only HR people or people professionals, but also people managers, leaders who are interested in hearing challenges in people management practice. So this year it will be taking place from 28th to 30th of June, again online, over 3 days, 3 half days. And the theme that you have, many of you have mentioned today, is accountability. So we're going to really look and explore accountability from people management's perspective. How do we address the gap? How accountable is HR, is humanitarian HR? How can HR drive quality and effectiveness? But also we will try to speak about ethics in people management decisions and processes, because I think very often we need to step back and think about how ethical are we in our processes. That can be very wonderful, but sometimes we forget about ethical side. So that's it, and I'm really happy to engage more on the chat box, and I will not take any more of your time. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Are there any other comments from the audience that we would like to bring in? I see there's lots of good engagement.
Please note, the audience, there's a poll. Please feel free to fill out this poll to say your background of where you're coming from, what organization. We find this information could be useful to identify the people in the room and moving forward with these initiatives. So please do fill out those polls if you could.
Yeah,
And
so maybe
Melissa?
Alex Martins, if you don't mind, we didn't plan this, but if you would allow to share your screen and audio. With the equity index, you've also been looking at basically comparing organizations, how they're performing, and you might have learned a lesson or two in what a good process looks like or how the data collection goes. So I don't know if you want to click on the yellow allow share audio video, we can bring you on if you want to react to that. And Hope Chigudu, who is our co-host for the whole event, she warns us that whatever we do, if we don't consider this a political project that considers power, then we might not see the results at the end of the day. So I don't know if Hope wants to add any more on that before we go. Okay, so I don't think Alex is available. Hope, are you available? Okay, not really, thanks. Okay, good, then let's go back to the program.
Maybe I could suggest just practical steps. What are the first steps practically that we can take? Maybe we can do a quick round of the panelists and also ask for the audience participation. What's the first thing we can do to get this ball rolling across the sector? Maybe, and I'll even add a follow-up question. Two things. What's the first step we can take? And secondly, what's the first constraint we need to address? Who would like to start from the panel? Melly, how about you?
Okay, thank you. So in terms of step, what I would say is employee well-being needs to become an organizational priority, okay? And if this is the intent, it has to be part of the strategic priority of the organization, like any other areas of the organization, okay? And again, managers, leaders, they should really embrace it. They should advocate for employee well-being, for mental health and psychosocial support themselves. And if that is not happening, there is not much we can do. And this is something that I really say from the bottom of my heart, because I've seen it in the organization I'm working for. So the leadership is critical. The political will is essential. In terms of constraints, we know, I mean, budget, financial restrictions, competitive priorities, you know, these priorities is much, let's say, important than, you know, employee well-being. And the fact that each time you ask a leader to invest in an initiative which is of support to their employees, they would say, but what will I, you know, gain from that? How can I quantify? How can I see? How can I be sure that I will get the return on the investment that I'm making? So those are the key issues that often comes up when you address this subject. So this is what I would say as my input on this question. Thank you for the opportunity.
Excellent. How about you, Eunice? What would be the first step that you would like to take and the first constraint that you would like to address?
Thank you, Scotty. For me, it's critical that we are all clear what is this staff well-being that we are talking about. What's the messaging that we are sending to the organization, to our people, to our partners, to the people that we want to collaborate with in carrying out this assignment? And therefore, messaging is critical. Sensitizing staff. This is what the staff well-being program is about. These are the expectations. And why you're doing that is because at the end of the day, it belongs to staff. It's for the benefit of staff. So you really want them to own it and feel it is meeting their needs, and that you're getting to a space of a value synergy between the values of the organization and the values of staff. Because as long as there's that continued disconnect in terms of the values and what you esteem as important, the organization and the staff, it's not likely to stand. It might be something else that's just another project on the bookshelves that no one is working on. And with supported with the education, we then need to put in what are those simple actionable measures that we can take, the low-lying fruits kind of, without having to look at what is budget intensive that we can put in place, and put that matrix that we talked of, that we will actually track, follow up on implementation, and hold people accountable for its implementation process at the different layers of the organization. So I'm looking at a top bottom kind of engagement where there's leadership at the top and also at the lower levels. We are all owning this process and running with it. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Eunice. And Roger, I think you without camera. If you're with us, would you like to add your comments?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I turned my video off to try to help the audio. I don't know if that's people can hear me now. I'm so sorry for my poor connection.
I think maybe if you want to turn your camera back off, we can just listen to you. It might be a better quality.
Okay, great. Thanks, Scotty. So I'm very much here. No, I agree with Melly and Eunice. I think leadership is absolutely crucial. I think that it was fantastic that the Leading Well report initiative was built on conversations with chief executives. That's where that started, and I think that whilst chief executives will be very short of time and won't want to get into detail, I think that it would be fantastic if chief executives can help to shape this, certainly be committed to a process. It will obviously need practitioners as well to develop questionnaires and to develop the project. So I think that getting senior management and senior managers involved at the beginning is really crucial, and is going to be setting the stage for greater action being taken as a result. So I think that's the starting point, really, and I think if one can perhaps have a chief executive group, perhaps a practitioners group to start shaping this up, then I think that will be well placed to get an initiative off the ground and moving forward. And I think CHS Alliance is very well placed to bring people together, to make things happen, and to get us all together like today, to share good practice and to move things forward step by step. Thank you.
Thank you. I love the idea of a working group to carry this forward, to put the action in place. And I agree that the CHS Alliance is well positioned to help facilitate that.
During my deliberation, I want.
I don't know if we had somebody contributing just there. If not, just to say that we had some great comments from the audience, from Yagana. Plan some action points right away, please. Yes, so this can be an action to call. We have a group of people here joined together who are interested in this topic and committed to this topic. So let's drive it forward. Yeah, I think there's a poll that asks for participation, for your interest to join, to carry this forward, and to start doing some action points. So I'll, for one, be happy to join that momentum. And for the others of you who are also willing and interested, let's take this forward. Yeah, Hope has said awareness that well-being is not by the way, but the real work. Indeed. So let's do the action to take this forward. Strengthening the inner so that it can serve the outer. Absolutely. Yeah. So with that, maybe I can hand back over to you, Melissa, for the sake of time.
Thank you. So as Scotty said, it wouldn't be a session on data collection and measuring if we didn't have another survey. So you'll see in the chat under session, we've created a very short 1-minute survey monkey. And the idea, if you fill out this survey, it will give us some more ideas about how you would like to proceed from here, because we definitely want an inclusive process going forward, building on what already exists. We heard about the HHR, we heard about the People Management Community Practice, which is limited to members. We heard about Equity Index. We heard several of you listed great examples. So please fill out that survey. And to conclude, before we hand off to the next session, why do we want to measure well-being as a strategic organizational imperative? Because it's the secret sauce, says Eunice. And it says, Melly, if we don't do it, we're going to be behind the competition. And speaking of competition, that's one of the reasons why we haven't seen yet a movement among organizations to do benchmark data. But if we can build something, a mechanism where we build trust and we frame this as a learning exercise, not as a name and shame, and we tap into things like the core standard, which the sector developed for itself and includes pieces that are relevant, maybe there's a way forward that would benefit everyone, and they see working in solidarity, looking at the collective, looking at the political, looking at issues of power, but also issues of basics. How do we feel as staff, and connecting it all together in a comprehensive way? We might actually, in maybe 10 years, be able to say every year the sector as a whole improved, And we know because of all the transition between our organization, that's going to benefit everyone. So a big thanks to Scotty and Dan, our co-facilitators, who did a lot of work, hours and hours of work preparing this session, and also to our inspirational speakers, Eunice, Roger, Melly. You saw me smiling because I kept writing down potential tweets of things you said, but I just don't have time to tweet it now. This is recorded, so we will have it on YouTube later. And for those of you who said they want even the chat to be recorded because there was so much rich discussion there, we will have a summary of the event. Now I want to release you to take a break or to come over. We have 2 simultaneous sessions. One is on Raise the Standard. We'll be going deeper into what exists in the core standard on power, culture, care. And we also have another one looking at organizational cultures. So please choose one and we'll see you on the other side. Big thank you to everyone. Have a terrific final day of the global gathering. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.